No? All right. I will stall for Megan. Hello. Welcome to the November office hours with Adobe Analytics Champions. My name is Kaya Walton. I'm the Director of Analytics for Voice of America. I am a three-time Adobe Analytics Champion. Before we jump in and introduce the rest of the champions that are joining us for this office hour, just a reminder to enter your questions in the chat, and this session is being recorded. You will be able to see the recording for this session as well as previous office hours, user group videos on previous office hours on the YouTube playlist that Mandy has posted on chat. But all videos related to user groups are also available on that channel. So we're going to go get started in terms of introducing the rest of the champions. Jen, did you want to go first?
Sure. I'm Jen Coons. I'm a principal analytics architect at 33Sticks, which is a small analytics and optimization agency. I've worked on the data collection side of analytics and optimization in MarTech since 2006 when I started. I think I even have Omniture scarf way up there. So this is my first year as a analytics champion and my second office hours.
Great. Nicholas?
Hey everybody, I am Nick Walter. I am a senior enablement analyst at Kroger Digital. Working inside Adobe for 7-8 years now. Moving from AA to CJA that's been the focus of my life for a while. And this is my first year being a champion.
Great. Megan, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Got here just in time. Sorry. I had a half-hour window. I used that to drive home from the office. Hi, I'm Megan Powers. I work at CarMax. Been here about 9 years now. This is my third year as champion. And I'm always excited and happy to do these office hours. Feel free to ping me or any of us afterward with more questions.
All right. We will start with a question on the chat. We have an emergent issue where data layer values are not populated at the time of the page view push event, DOM ready. I was planning to move the collection trigger from data layer push to window loaded. Are there other recommendations until we can identify what might be causing this issue?
So by page view push event, it sounds like this is probably an event-driven data layer, probably even the Adobe client data layer. Okay, Melissa says yes. So data layer, well, ideally, when you are pushing into your event-driven data layer, you are only doing it when all of the values that you need are there. But it sounds like probably that's the issue, is knowing when all of the values are going to be there so that you can push in. Yeah, and that's trickier. And by all means, anyone else speak up. But it's really just going to depend on when you. So right now, are your developers pushing into the data layer? What causes that push action to happen on DOM ready currently? And sorry to have to chat. Can we take somebody off of mute so that we can just chat? Okay, they are pushing in at DOM ready, and you're thinking maybe of asking them to push it to window loaded instead, since that'll be a little bit later. Yeah, if everything's ready at window loaded, then yes. It really depends on what is holding you back. Are there like APIs that you have to listen to for responses, or parts of the page that haven't loaded yet? And it might be that this is an awkward, too deep in the weeds for office hours, in which case I'd be happy to chat with you afterwards too, and we can figure it out. But it's a common enough issue, particularly if you have Target. Is that at play, or is this only analytics? Yes, we have Target. Yeah, because then the problem is if you delay till window loaded, then the target flicker will be even worse. And you just kind of have to weigh, well, do we really need all of these data points for our initial push? Or what can we do to speed up any of those data points? So yeah, I don't know if we can necessarily solve for it on here. I can at least let you know you're not alone. that this is a common enough issue to have, and it's really going to depend on your devs and your architecture and your data points, how we can either speed that up or delay the push until the last possible moment. And if that's not enough, then by all means, Melissa, you and I can find a way to sync up afterwards, and I'd be happy to help you sort through that.
Yeah, just to add on to that, we see timing issues all the time. So that'd be my guess as to what's going on. Just like Jennifer said, basically.
All right. Pre-submitted questions. Form conversion tracking best practices. I think that was the question.
Megan, you had the most. You're the only one who filled it out in advance.
Okay, let's see. Should I share my screen because I'm a visual person? Probably.
Yes.
Let's get the right window. Okay. I was gonna say, are you all seeing my screen? But I see a big white screen. So
yep.
Okay.
In which case, yes, we are seeing it.
I
mean, I'd be happy to share instead.
Yeah. While I figure this out, it couldn't hurt. Thank you.
Sure.
It says analysis workspace, but it is blank.
Will you drop your sharing so I can take it over?
Yes.
There we go.
Okay, thank you. Okay. So yeah, form conversion best practices. Some tricks I use. I'm sure there are more. Other champs, feel free to add on. And hopefully this is what you meant by form conversion. But we typically on any form, we have an initiation event and a submission event. So we can do things like create calculated metrics based for an it to submit rate, and create fallout reports of like people going through the form. If you want, you can put it in it, depending on how important each step of the form is to you, you could put an event on each step of the form so you can create that fallout view. Or we, for instance, usually have a prop if there are multiple steps in that form to define the steps in between, which is also helpful when it's a spa page and there's not necessarily a new event that's firing on each page load. It's not really a new page load.
So by steps, you mean though like a multi-part form and not necessarily like different fields in the form. Yeah.
Correct. Yep. We typically don't put tracking on every field in the form just to save on server calls. It's also not necessarily everyone's final choice, which kind of brings me to the next point, which is if there are radio buttons on the form or other pieces you want to fill out, we typically don't add click tracking to all those for server calls. And we don't know if that's the customer's final selection, if they're just clicking around, right? Instead, what we do is usually when they click submit or go to the next step in the form, at that point, we capture the user's selections. We typically do that with the method described below. We have a custom prop 5 on every single click on our site. So this structure is we capture a page name on prop 3, we capture the link name on prop 4, and then we use prop 5 to describe these extra things, right? Sometimes we use it if there are multiple clicks with the same name on the same page to distinguish which area of the page it's on, but sometimes it's helpful for these radio button type situations where like we have a finance form and on one of the pages we ask like, do you have a co-buyer? And there's just a yes or no toggle. We don't click tracking on every time someone clicks yes or no, but when they hit submit, we capture the customer selection of yes or no co-buyer on submit in the prop 5. And then we have a prop 6 that concatenates all those things. That's a helpful structure for us because it lets us really slice and dice that data. And then the last kind of tip I have here is we don't capture any PII data in form tracking because you can't delete it in Adobe, which means it's not CCPA or GDPR compliant. If you wanted to do that, I would, find a way to hash it or anonymize it or just capture like a more binary type event of like, did they click in this form field versus what they're actually typing in. So I'll stop there and see if anyone else has anything to add.
So by the initiation event, is that like just when the page loads that has the form on it? How do you determine initiated?
Yeah, usually we do it based on either the click that leads to that page or the page loading. For us, a lot of our forms, because we're a used car retailer, so leads are a big KPI for us versus sales online. So we have, anytime someone can initiate a lead on our site, we fire those same props 3 through 6, but we also fire like a lead initiation event, as well as what click. We have an eVAR that describes the method of lead initiation, like what page and what button it's on for conversion tracking. So all those things are usually bundled together.
Makes sense.
I would also add tracking errors. It's been very helpful in terms of understanding whether the clue that this is a required field is not necessarily blatant enough for them to realize that it's required. And so you discover a lot of things from error data in terms of the usability of your form. So trying to capture that as much as possible and what's driving that error would be really helpful.
Yeah, that's a great point. We put our errors into a list var. People have different ways of doing it, but we usually use the list var to capture like what page it was on, and then a colon, and then what was the customer facing error, like you didn't fill out this field, and then also what's the back colon and what's the back end error. So because the message we display to the customer might look very different than the one in the back end, is like on the back end might be like, this looks like fraud, but obviously we're not displaying. So we usually capture those 3 things as well. Yeah, it's a great point.
Anybody else have any addition?
I think the only other thought that I have is just it can be very tempting to track like every form field. And there used to be a JavaScript plugin, like an Adobe plugin you could throw into your S code that would do that and detect like the last form field that was touched before the user moved away from the page. I actually have a ancient blog post 2011 about that. So most of it's not relevant because I don't even think that plugin is supported anymore. But the idea, at least, of why it's dangerous to track every form field. It's just a lot of data. It's a lot of server calls. But you also have to think through if the last form field that was touched was email. Well, that actually means probably that the next form field was the one that was the bother. Email wasn't the problem. It was the fact that we were asking them to confirm their email, but that's not going to show up because that wasn't actually touched. So there's a lot of things like that the data can be a little bit misleading if you're trying to be that granular. I do think it can be valuable to track, particularly if the form's not at the top of the page, track just the first interaction, the first time they focus in any of those fields as some sort of form initiation. And then, track errors and submit and everything else here. So, but if you're really into each form field, how it's being interacted with, then there might be better tools for you out there. Because it's really granular and can be hard to interpret that data.
Okay, next question. Classification usage apart from CID codes.
All right, I can read through the things I wrote, and then everyone feel free to jump in. I'm probably forgetting some, but these are various ways that we use classifications. So CIDs, like you mentioned, and for anyone on the chat that maybe doesn't know what they're talking about, that like any tracking code, like on marketing campaigns or ways people are getting to your site, query string parameters, stuff like that. We also, one of those things can be UTM codes. So we do use classifications to break down UTM codes and have the different source, campaign, medium, term, and content.
So I'm assuming by that you mean like you send them in all concatenated and then use classifications to break them back out. Yeah. Yep. So you're not using 5 variables on that. Yeah.
Correct. Yep. We do something where we will do the classification import method with a zip code file with the following fields attached to zip code. So like the nearest store to that zip code and the location number, information about the store, like what type it is, what size it is, the number of employees there, etc. And then just the city it's in, the geography, anything else we want to capture. That's important for us to do every time we have a new store opening, because otherwise, if we don't import that file, a zip code is going to be pointing to not the nearest store, right? So that that's part of our process anytime we do a grand opening. We do it often, like you just mentioned, to save on EVARs. So when combining several characteristics together in an EVAR and concatenating it with a delimiter like a colon or a pipe. One example for us is application type. So if someone does a financing application, after they fill out an application, we capture various things in an EVAR together, right? Like the application ID, anonymous, the decision type, what the number of cars they're qualifying for, stuff like that. We then use a classification to break those down on the back end. Another example is we have several pages on our site that are personalized or dynamic based on what the customer has already done. So like our app homepage or our customer account page, we want those things to be relevant for someone as soon as they hit that page. So if they have already done an instant offer to see how much their car is worth, that little module will display upon page load. Or if they've already done a financing application, they want to see what cars they're now available, that little module will appear. Or if they haven't done those things, we want to say, hey, don't forget you can do financing. But we try to capture the state of the page as the customer hits it. So we can do conversion rates, right? So we use classification there to, again, combine, concatenate all those combinations of modules that's displaying for a customer at any given time, and then use classifications to break those things out. Like, did the trade-in appear? Yes or no. Financing appear? Yes or no. Another big one for us is merchandising EVARs. So we use classification on merchandising EVARs, particularly on our search page. That's a great way to combine lots of information about the product and the state of that product as the customer saw it when the search results were loaded. So again, we concatenate that in the merchandising EVAR, and we are able to capture things like, has the customer previously viewed this car? Is there a price drop on it? What the shipping cost is? What type of image is it using? Like, is it using a front facing or side facing? Just things we want to know. That helps us be able to say, like, okay, well, all the side facing cars are getting more clicks than, or views, impressions, and then clicks than otherwise. Or but combined with price drop, they're getting not very much, right? So that's a big category for us as well. So those were some of my examples, but yeah, others feel free to add on.
So I'll tack onto that. One of the most common places we use this here at Kroger is actually for navigation, because the site is so big. We get a lot of detail. Clicking on the third product in a list and a carousel on the third section of the site. I had wrote all this in here, but I think I got saved over. So I'll just talk about it for a second. But yeah, we'll capture a thing like the source, the detail, the sub-detail, the position in the list, and then we just string it all together with an underscore and then break it apart into different dimensions. And it's a great way, as Megan mentioned, to save on EVARs. I think this is one of the key ways that people save on EVARs, is to just pile as many things together as they can, and then break them back apart later. Another place where we use this, we'll get, especially from third-party apps or whatever that's loaded into the site, some of the information that we need is in non-human readable alphanumeric, and that's all that we can capture. So we'll take that and then basically use the classification rules as a lookup table. If the alphanumeric equals this, then we'll populate that in a different dimension as well. So we'll use those just to make non-human readable things human readable again. So not my favorite way of doing that particular chore, but it works when there's no other options. So.
And the other things that come to mind for me, I mean, just the product string or SKUs altogether is a really common one of, you capture just the SKU online and then you upload all of the information
Analytics
you
that
have
are
about
helping
that.
B2B companies.
Oh, am I on mute?
No, I could hear you.
I could hear both of you.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. It freaked me out there a little bit. So yeah, products is a big one. And then another, user information, if you're capturing user IDs and you want to bring in information about like what, certain segmentation, are they this gold member status, how long have they been a member? And a lot of this stuff, if you get into analytics, you can also use in Target, which can be great for segmenting in Target. And then let's see, I did want to mention, so Eric Matisoff had just talked about this in customer journey analytics, but I think a lot of it would also fit in old school analytics as well, of ways to deal with product variations, where when the product page first loads, you don't know what variation of the product they might choose. So at that point, you just have kind of a higher level, well, this is the full zip hoodie. And then later on, once they've selected the medium, you have a more specific SKU. Sometimes you want to see that info all together, and sometimes you want to see it split out. But really, classifications are great anytime you want to bring much more granular data into higher level. So a lot of the time you'll see classifications on super granular things like the amount of time spent on a page or something like that. Instead of seeing 47 seconds, which is super granular and hard to do analysis on, you can group it into 30 to 40 seconds and at least have a few less line items that way. And then this was a rock star tip, years ago now, but activity map often has really hard to read values because it just relies on your HTML. If you copy your activity map stuff into custom variables, then you can classify it as well, so that instead of the ugly HTML, whatever the devs put in for your class, you can put a friendlier value there. And sorry, there's a lot of ideas. And then the last one is page names can kind of suck to do as classifications, and I don't want to throw it out there as kind of a last resort, I suppose. But particularly if you're doing like a site replatforming, and it used to be that you called your homepage home, and now you've called it something else that's more useful to you, but you still want your historical data all brought together, you can use classifications to say, old page name and new page name now both show up in this classified report under new page name. So classifications is super powerful. You can do a lot of good stuff with it.
Yeah. Jennifer, that's a great reminder about the activity map. You said it was a
this was I don't know. This was probably 2018 or something, 2019 maybe. But yeah, old rockstar tip.
Oh,
I was supposed to turn into a blog post. I don't know if I ever did.
Yeah, feel free to post those in the chat.
Sure.
Those links, that'd be great. I might steal it too. But yeah, in this documentation would be great.
Sure. Yeah, I'll throw all the links in there. All right. So sorry. On to the customer journey analysis with B2B companies.
Yeah, I answered this one too at one point.
Oh, no.
But that's not a problem. I was able to find the old version, so I still have my notes.
Okay.
But it looks like this is less about actual CJA's tool and is actually more about how to use analytics for B2B. And that's a relevant question. I mean, that's most of the time we talk about customer-facing websites and e-com websites and stuff like that. But B2B, there's a lot to look at, and more often than not, it's usually a little bit more. It's definitely more informational. There's a ton of information on a lot of the B2B websites that I've worked on before, and a lot of it we'll look at like, what product, what information, what types of things are people looking at, when are they looking at it, because depending on the business, there's a lot of seasonality that is involved. um, you know Basic touch point analysis, um, you know tracking every interaction. Like I said, what are people looking at, how are they interacting with your website, where are they looking for um, the information on whatever your product is that you're moving or building or whatever. And then, are they looking for demos, are they looking for samples? What are they looking to get out of you, what information can you make more readily available, and what are the block points? Basic funnel analysis. It might not be a conversion in that it is a sale on the website if it's B2B, but if they're submitting a form, if they're calling you, if they're scheduling a demo, if they're ordering samples, anything like that, that's a highly relevant conversion. So what does that person look like? What was their journey to get to that point? That's all stuff that we can still capture in AA and report on, and then improve the website to help improve that particular funnel. Um, you know, of course, all this depends on the business, but basic segmentation and audiences, who's coming to your site and why. Are you getting more, um, whoever you actually want to sell this to? Or are you getting a lot of distributors to your website? Is that who you want to have coming? And then you can segment them apart, look at different marketing channels, how are they coming to your site, all that kind of stuff. Then, of course, you can set up alerts to help you when there are problems or seasonal changes that you might not know about. And then, just any kind of predictive to look forward. How do you think your year's going to go, barring anything crazy, based off of the past? So, I mean, there's a lot, and we could probably spend a whole lot of time talking about how to use this tool in B2B, but there's still a lot of value in B2B analysis, even though a lot of what we want to talk about is direct to customer or B2C businesses, because people are making a purchase online more often than not, and it's sometimes more fun or more fun because it's easier to see what's actual revenue or whatever coming through. But there's a lot. There's still a ton you can do with this, and I believe that Adobe's trying to make a lot of advances in this particular area as well. I think it's been a focus for them for a while, so hopefully we see something coming from them pretty soon too.
And it's interesting because I feel like the answer to this is already kind of answered in some of these other ones of how do we best track form conversions, which is a big B2B thing frequently, or how do we bring in Salesforce information, which is another good way to enhance your data for B2B. But for me, I think just the flow reports are super valuable and often underused, I think. Yeah.
I'm going to switch gears for a second, unless somebody else has anything to add to that question, and take a question from the chat. We recently had to disable activity map because one of our authenticated sites was collecting PII, PHI. Would creating a separate report suite for our authenticated sites allow us to activate activity map on our public facing sites? I'm thinking that when we add a rule to AAP/launch would need to be duplicated.
You might not even need a separate report suite because Activity Map, the collection of data for Activity Map is controlled in the implementation. Like, yes, Activity Map is a switch you can turn on and off in your admin settings, but as far as whether it's actively collecting data, that's whether or not you've told, like if you're using Launch, that's a setting in your analytics extension as to whether or not to turn that on. But you could make that setting more dynamic and say, either just for this entire property, this is the authenticated site property, therefore no activity map, or you could get as granular as, hey, we know these 4 pages are the main ones that are capturing PII. Let's turn activity map off just for them. You're welcome.
All right.
I'll also link uh, self self plug, but um, activity map works okay for us. It doesn't work great. We often use our own custom stuff though. I will link to a blog post I wrote a couple years ago about how we created our own like Excel version of.
Yeah,
Uh,
I mean, if you're doing this, that basically is activity map right there. So,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So I have that like going into using Report Builder, oldie but a goodie, right? In
Hmm.
Excel of how to do that, like create your own custom heat map for clicks as well as conversions, like because you could put any metric in there. It doesn't have to be clicks. So I'll link. Let me go find that, and I'll link that
Yeah, yeah.
in the chat too.
And hey, Report Builder might be an oldie and goodie, but they recently redid it. And in theory,
Yeah.
it now works on Macs, which I
Oh,
really appreciate. So,
yeah.
um, yeah, Report Builder is still a great tool.
Anybody else want to add to that before we jump to the next question? Okay. How Salesforce CRM integration is helping people understand data in Adobe Analytics.
So I'm curious about this was because integration, I mean, there used to be an official like Genesis integration with Salesforce, but that was many years ago. I know that I believe Stape sells an integration currently. And I'm sure that other companies like High Touch and stuff could help you get that data from one place to another. But I don't know how many official either Salesforce supported or Adobe supported integrations there are anymore. Um, but if you can find an integration, there's data from analytics that you might want in Salesforce. So, what do you know from the user journey that's interesting? In theory, Salesforce might already know some of the like marketing campaigns that brought them to your site. That really depends on what you're doing in Salesforce, but that kind of information can be great. But generally, we're talking about the other direction of let's get some Salesforce data into analytics. And this could be something like just bringing in information from Salesforce about your users. So, Salesforce knows that they are gold level or have been interested since such a date or are working with this account or part of this company. Any of that information, if you can import it, um, again, even as classifications, that would be swell. To me, the biggest one though is particularly if you are a B2B company, it can be really hard to know what happens after a form is submitted on your site, and that's often the most important bit because that's whether or not they actually convert and bring you money. Salesforce knows that. So if you can set up an integration that lets you know that, yes, this form submission resulted in this much revenue, then that can make your web analytics data become a lot more useful because it can help you know, yes, you had 100 form submissions, but none of them converted. Therefore, you're probably barking up the wrong trees and it's low quality traffic versus you had 100 form submissions and almost all of them were great and brought you lots and lots of money. So let's give the marketers a raise. Really just it depends a lot on what data you can bring. I don't know, maybe somebody else has a Salesforce integration that's active and still working. I haven't seen a good one for years. Jody here is sharing, we found if we create a segment in Adobe and share it with an admin level user, someone on the Salesforce side can match it up with Salesforce. Sweet.
Anybody else have any addition? All right, I am dropping the first link. So just a reminder, if you have any questions, just drop it in chat. But since that was the end of our pre-submitted and I don't see any questions from the chat, we're going to tackle some questions from Experience League. So I'm dropping the first link into the chat. Meanwhile, please feel free to drop your questions. But let's start with this one, opt-out tracking in Adobe Analytics. I'm currently exploring options to be able to track basic traffic data on our web and in mobile app in an opt-out scenario. In our current situation, Adobe Analytics tracking is strictly bound to opt-in scenario, meaning if the customer declines analytics cookies, Adobe Analytics is not fired at all. According to this video and Experience League, it should be possible to collect a certain minimum data even if the customer opts out and be in compliance with GDPR. Does anyone have any experience with this solution? What would be the requirements to implement the opt out tracking via Tag Manager? Also, according to the screenshot above, only opt in status and opt in opt out events are tracked on all server calls. Does that mean that even with this solution, it is not possible to see all traffic on a specific URL or page name? That was a lot.
Let's see here. So, sorry, the screenshot even within here is hard to see. There are ways of doing kind of what Google's currently doing with advanced consent mode of cookieless pings, where you still send a bit of information, you just don't set a cookie and you don't have any identifiers attached to it, because that's what CCPA and GDPR really care about, are those identifiers. I'm not a lawyer. Please talk to your legal team. Do not sue me. There are ways of hard coding beacons. That's a common way I've seen folks track opt-outs. So the app measurement library, when it runs and you fire s.t, all it's doing is creating a tiny invisible, like 1 by 1 pixel image that has all of the information we want to know in the URL. You can just create that image yourself, no JavaScript. And there are some various settings I can look up and get back to you momentarily that'll make sure it does not set any cookies. The data will be really messy. Your visits and visitors numbers will be utterly worthless, but you can at least see the number of times people clicked the accept all button, for instance. But please talk to your legal team first before doing any such thing. And heck, I probably should have looked at this video first to see if that's the suggestion that they were talking about. But
something we did recently, again, consult your legal team. And I'm not sure if this would solve your particular issue, but we recently went through a process called the CNAME upgrade, where we started setting Adobe's IDs and tracking based off of CarMax's domain instead of Adobe's domain. That way it is a first-party domain and not a third-party domain, which helps us protect us against cookieless. Again, not exactly sure if that is answering your question or is helpful, but that way that protects us against certain browsers that are blocking third-party cookies but not first-party cookies. And
so, to be clear, Adobe Analytics sets first-party cookies inherently.
Yeah.
So that might help you get around a few things. And for a few years, that really helped with Apple's ITP, because Apple really only likes cookies that are set by servers and not by JavaScript. So if you do the CNAME thing, it looks like it's being set by your server, and that kept Apple happy until Apple learned to see right through that. So, this giant game of whack-a-mole that we're playing with Apple, these days, the best you can do is set up a proxy server. And I can put a link on how to do that. That's actually how Apple itself, if you go to apple.com, you can see how they're tracking that. And that will help with some of the Apple blocking cookies, though that is separate from consent. Because you still need consent for first-party cookies. Sorry, I have a lot. I just did a webinar. I really don't want to promote myself. That is not my goal here. But I just did a webinar on Friday on this exact topic that is often a misunderstood topic. So I'll throw a link out there for that as well, I suppose. And yeah, I should have looked at this advanced, because I don't know quite the solution that this video suggests. I'm curious. Yeah.
Any other thoughts? Okay. We have a question from the chat from Melissa. What are some other examples of report builder use cases? We just started using Adobe Analytics this year and haven't tried using it yet.
So we at Kroger, report builder was used more widely than workspace for a while. After, especially since a lot of actual presentations were still done in PowerPoint, and were done very often in PowerPoint. So updating those numbers became very tedious. So setting up a report builder where you can basically build a table from Adobe Analytics and then have it flow into Excel and then link that Excel to a PowerPoint, you're able to update your numbers very, very quickly. There are also just some, you know, uh, formulas and some stuff that's either not really possible or hard to do in Adobe Analytics. Whereas if you can pull out top level data into Excel, you can do just about whatever you want in Excel. Not always smart to do it there necessarily, but you can do whatever you want. So there's a lot of just extra ad hoc analysis that you can do in Report Builder. And then if so long as it's not a huge amount of data, you can kind of marry it up to another data set in Excel as well, to make some directional decisions and stuff. But for the most part, it's a very easy and efficient way to pool at least aggregate data. There is a 50,000 row limit per query. But to pull top level or aggregate data out to use for reporting or presentations or just a quick deep dive or something like that, Report Builder can be a very, very powerful tool and extremely time saving, depending on what you're using it for. So I highly recommend, especially like you said, you're new to Adobe Analytics, so therefore new to Report Builder. Highly recommend taking a little bit of time to explore it and familiarize yourself with how to pull stuff, because it'll make life a lot easier in a lot of ways.
We use it for a lot of the things Nick mentioned, as well as if we have Tableau, which is a data visualization tool. It as far as I know, there's no direct link into Adobe Analytics there, so we use Report Builder a lot to have like the data get pulled into Report Builder, do a lot of the calculations, and bring in other sources, and have Report Builder do the automatic date updating, right? Like it always starts from X day to this day, and go from there. And then you can hook up Excel/Report Builder to sources like Tableau, like through an FTP location. So that's one other use case that we use that for.
And yeah, just to note, there is not currently an AA direct integration to Tableau. There is to Power BI, and there is a BI connector in CJA to any BI tool, but not in AA. So.
Yep.
Do you know if Report Builder is available to all tiers of analytics license?
I think so.
Yep, it should
That's
be.
pretty standard, yeah.
Yeah, if you're in Workspace, I think it's under Tools. I'm not in well, I am somewhere, but it's under
Yeah.
Tools and then Report Builder, and you just download it. It is an install, so depending on your company, you might have to, like I have to request admin rights to my own computer to actually install it or update it. So just be prepared for that.
Same.
So apparently I shared the link to the old Report Builder.
Hey,
But
to be
Mandy
fair,
shared the link
that was a good link for like a decade. That tool did not change much for a
to
long
the new
time.
Report Builder. And I believe that also has, let me just double check to make sure I'm not lying, information on how to install. Yep, it's in there to install Report Builder and how to set it up. Thanks, Mandy.
Oh,
All right.
another question.
Oh. In your experience, what is the most important aspects that a digital analytics leader should know about the Adobe Suite? An analytics target. I'm not quite sure what AL is. Launch. Is
Launch.
it?
Probably.
There you
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
Jeopardy.
Slash
Um,
tags.
Yeah, that's right. Tags. So I'm never going to call it that. Sorry.
No.
do you know if there's an article or content that talks about this? I know the answer can be very broad, but it would be very helpful to know your opinion.
For me, it just kind of depends on your company structure. Like I have a data implementation team, so I don't do a whole lot in launch. Actually, we don't use launch at all. But like I don't do a lot of the implementation stuff. I focus on actual insights and finding the the gotchas, and then data storytelling. Um, if but there are a lot of people I've met that are kind of a one show when it comes to analytics. They've got to deal with pretty much everything, and at that point, um, I don't know. You've got to make sure you have clean data. Otherwise, it doesn't matter if you have an I gotcha or an aha, because it might just not be valid anyway. So, yeah, that's kind of a hard one.
Yeah, I think if we're talking specifically about the whole suite, and I'm sorry, Adobe, they probably don't want me to say this, just be aware that the suite doesn't necessarily all work together great all the time. There were a lot of different companies that got acquired at different points and have different teams. Some tools have really good synergies, like Target and Analytics, and others like AEM, Adobe Experience Manager, is a good tool, but you may not have a lot of advantages of that being an Adobe tool when you're also working with tags and you're working with analytics. It could just be any CMS at that point, practically. So don't just think because they all have Adobe on them that they'll necessarily work together really well. And same true for Google. That Google's name is on a lot of things. That doesn't mean that they play well together. I would also say Adobe is a very powerful tool, especially analytics. It's very flexible. It can do a lot of things, but that doesn't necessarily mean you should do all those things. And I find it often helps to start simpler than to try to capture everything and make sense of it after the fact. You can always add on to things, but it can you can get into technical debt with such a complicated tool if you shoot for too much at once.
This is probably super basic, but make sure you have good documentation for all of them. Have shared variable map in your company. Have good onboarding and training in program for those three things. Have good user administration setups where you have different groups, like same group probably doesn't need access to all three or the same level of access to all three. You might not want an analyst having production rights in Adobe Launch, right? Your tag management system, or the ability to turn on a target test that they might know nothing about. So just make sure those are clearly defined and have good group dynamics for users. I would say think outside the box in terms of how they can be used and connected. We use Launch for a ton of things other than Adobe, right? We use it to implement Google Analytics. We use it to implement our third-party tags. We use Target for many things besides just Adobe. We use it to implement things like Full Story so we can throttle the thresholds and stuff. And so that, we can go and use Target to do things like block certain bots from hitting. So it's helpful to think about the ways that they're intended to be used, as well as like, well, you have this great tool. What else can you do with it, and use those integrations to your advantage. Some things explore the in Adobe Launch, the various extensions for analytics and Target that can be used, and as well as other off-the-shelf open source things as well. I think this is a super open-ended question. We can go
in a direction. Well, but I think with that, it's a great question to be asking, but there is so much out there that coming to things like this, that's what you should be doing. Go in the community, see what other folks are doing, because when it's so open-ended, comparing notes and seeing examples of what other folks are doing is one of the most helpful things that I've seen. Ask questions and see what other questions people are asking, and you're on the right track.
All right. pulling another one from Experience League. Let's see. Identity map. It is almost 5 p.m. in Eastern time, so my brain's checking out. Identity map not recorded when sent in set consent in profile. Hello, I am working on sending user consent using the set consent action type in Adobe Launch. I'm specifically trying to compare the profile against the ECID generated. While I can see the consent lands in the profile, the identity map sent along with set consent doesn't appear to be recorded in the profile, and stitching between the ECID and the ID and the identity map isn't occurring. Additionally, I'd like to know how to send ID specific and set consent and what the object structure should look like. Here is my consent object. So he included code and then the consent launch rule setup.
And to be clear, this is all the new Web SDK AEP ways of dealing with consent, which I think a lot of the identity map stuff kind of relies on anyway. So, and I'll admit, I currently have as a to-do on my to-do list of learning more about how AEP handles consent, because it is kind of a new world and not super well documented. So I may not be able to do much here other than commiserate.
Um, I know one thing, again, that this is not my area of expertise, but one thing we do is like if a customer clicks our opt-out button, that sets a cookie. Our developers then, develop Adobe launch rules that says if that opt-out cookie is present, do not fire various Adobe launch rules, right? Those Adobe launch rules that they prevent from firing are the ones that trigger like all the third-party tags that we set, some of the first-party tags as well. So that's the very non-technical answer to some things we're doing. Opt-out button sets a cookie. Launch rules look for that cookie. If cookie is present, don't fire XYZ launch rules. Not sure if that helps or not.
Well, and in the pre-AEP world, as you're just describing, you if they don't consent, you don't send the beacon. In the post-AEP world, that may not necessarily be true because you might be sending, one big batch of data to the edge, and then from there, based off of consent, deciding, well, this bit of data can go along to target, this can't go to analytics, and if you're using event forwarding, then what things can and can't go along from there. So it's definitely less clear cut, and it might be that you are sending a beacon to Adobe despite a lack of consent. It's just your beacon carries within it the knowledge that the user did not consent, and therefore it doesn't get to go any further. Where I'm struggling is trying to figure out how identity map would work with the consent pieces. So identity map is the ability to use different bits of information you might need know about a user to pull together perhaps their journey across different things, or in spite of cookies not lasting and things like that. But now I just want to know more. I'm sorry, I can't give a better answer, but consent and identity map is all a pretty new concept in the Adobe world.
All right. We have a few minutes left. Like I mentioned in the chat, just a last call for questions. But in the meantime, we're doing one more Experience League question. I sent it in the chat. Dear team, so it's confirmation and guidance needed for job search filter tracking in Adobe Analytics. Dear team, I need to track the search filters, which have various options, and define a data layer structure for this. Here's the data layer suggestion we're considering. Could you advise which format is more suitable? Are both wrong? Additionally, I want to capture the filter values and list EVAR1 in Adobe Analytics using Adobe Client data layer. Could
Client,
you
I'm
guide
assuming.
client? Yes. Um, Could you guide me on setting this up? Thank you.
So either of these could, well, yeah, either of these could work, particularly if it is only ending up in a list var in analytics. Like this isn't going to go into CJA. You're not sending it along to any other data thing. Then you could get away with just sending a string that's comma delimited. And I believe that it might even make sense to pass that along as a within the data object rather than your XDM object. Um, However, if you do want to pass it as an array, then there is some transformation you can do in your data stream to turn that back into the string object that the list var is expecting. If you want, I can try to pull up examples of that. But um, the new data world where we're not just looking at props and evars and list vars and all of that, and instead, get to structure our data and key value pairs and stuff, the array might make more sense in the long run. But if we're strictly speaking analytics, then you might save yourself some trouble and just stick with a comma delimited string. Yeah, I might flag this one and come back with some examples of what you can do with this in data prep in your data streams with your mapping to turn that back into what you want. Like there's a join function and things like that, as well as ways to pass data through the web SDK into, well, I guess this didn't specify the web SDK, did it?
I don't think so.
Yeah, no, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. In this case, it's whatever you're going to do in your tag manager to turn this into list var one. And you could go either way with, a JavaScript join function or just directly map to your search filters object. And this is already in the format that your list var wants it in. Personally, I like arrays better. It's easier to join them together, but if I were passing this to, say, a prop or an evar, and I wanted all of them together, I would want to make sure that any given combination would always be in the same order. So if this time around it was Berlin Software Engineering Professional, and next time somebody clicked Professional first and then Berlin, I wouldn't want those showing up as separate line items in my report. And if it's an array, then it's rather easy with JavaScript to just say, hey, always sort it alphabetically so that if we get the same 3 items together, they will always appear in the same order and therefore the same line item in the report. But I'm also a JavaScript developer, so I probably have some biases there. But in true Adobe fashion, either way would work. That's
All right, we have a few minutes left, and I don't think we have any more questions. So we are going to wrap it up. Thank you so much for joining us. Hope you'll join us next month for our next office hours. If you have any other questions, just go ahead and post them on Experience League. And so a lot of the champions are always there to answer questions. And like I said at the beginning, the recording for the session will be available on the YouTube playlist that Mandy has shared at the beginning of office hours. Thanks, everybody.
thanks. And real fast, because I did tell Melissa I'd get back. Melissa, if you still want to talk about your data layer, find me. We'll chat about it.